Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the live today. Hi. Hello, Captain Guri, Gautam. Welcome to the live today. Fatafat. Sabhi log aajo. Welcome to the weekend live. And today it's going to be a quick recap of our ROR rules. But before we do that, Pan, unfortunately, Pan is chewing gum. So did you watch Beast trailer? No, I haven't watched any trailers. In fact, I have been pretty much keeping my distances from I'm at a safe distance from television. The last time perhaps I saw anything on television was before I arrived in Hong Kong. Weekends usually are more when I'm trying to venture out. Pretty much my entertainment has been limited to YouTube, if at all. Otherwise, most of the time is spent in office or perhaps watching or something, reading. So that's that. So welcome to the live, and I hope you guys are doing absolutely fine. I'm going to take random questions, but not now, a little later maybe. For now, we are just going to start with rule number 3 for ROR. We're not going to cover the rule like top A to Z. We are going to pick up few peculiar things which are most commonly asked or more frequently asked, and to just entertain doubts in and around rule number 3. So in case you guys have got any doubts pertaining to ROR, rules of the road in general, feel free to shoot them across. In case I know the answer, I'll be happy to answer you. आज story में confusion हो गई थी ना sir? David, yes. Samarth, you are absolutely right. Actually, at times when I'm uploading the story, अगर मैंने गलती से ध्यान हटा and I end up leaving the default option which is always taken as part B, then it gets screwed completely. So yes, and at times I don't realize वो चली गई है, but I end up always, whenever I upload a story, that's why I make sure that I check my own story and I just go and tap on the answer so that I know for sure that I have selected the right answer. So it seldom happens, but it has happened in past that a wrong option has been selected by mistake. But yes, today I corrected again myself, but this time I realized it of my own, because sometime in the evening I was just scrolling through my stories and I realized that the option which I have taken was not the correct option, but that B was like a default option which has gone. Oh, how am I supposed to mug up all the rules in just 3 years BSc course? Any ideas? Sir, rules are very easy. We are just going to talk about them. Rules are very easy. You don't have to mug them up. When you ask that why and how to mug up rules, do you mug up any of the songs? But we know thousands of songs back of our memory. How do we go about remembering millions of songs? Not millions maybe, but hundreds of songs, thousands of songs, back of our mind, and we know them tone by tone, beat by beat. How is that possible? Like word by word. Again, we are trying to recreate. It's like muscle memory. So you need to run through your rules time and again. You don't have to mug them up, but you need to have multiple reads back and forth. And then a part of it will be retained, a part of it is still not going to be retained. It's very difficult to remember them one by word, but what you will eventually be left with, and one thing for sure you are going to be left with, is the overall understanding of the rules. That you are not going to, it's just like driving. If you know how to drive, even if you go about if you go back driving a car or a two-wheeler after 2 years or 3 years, you're not going to forget about it completely. You are still going to remember it, yeah, right? That's muscle memory. So it's just like trying to create. Mind is you can train your mind to remember something. So unless you don't feel awkwardly bored with the rules of the road, I think you guys are going to do just fine. So that's that. Now coming to the live, let's start with it before it gets too prolonged. And why don't you reply DMs? So sometimes 2-3 months ago you used to reply me and clear my doubts. Siddharth, it's very difficult, man. I don't have the luxury of time to go about replying on the DMs anymore. I rarely get time to for myself, so it's very difficult to answer each and every one one-on-one on DM. And I don't, in fact, I've quoted this time and again that I am not very frequent in fact, I'm not visiting my DMs maybe once in a week, and that to my primary inbox. I don't even go to my secondary inbox because usually the questions are repetitive and if at all they are different, they are too lengthy to be like, it's like writing a complete paragraph. So unfortunately, that connect, I admit I have lost that connect with you guys, but that's like because of the paucity of the time and I don't have much options to choose from. So I hope you're going to cut me some slack, and nonetheless लाइव सेशंस हैं, यहाँ जो क्वेश्चन पूछने पूछ लो, जो भी डाउट्स हैं आप पूछ सकते हो. अगर मुझे नहीं पता होगा तो कोई ना कोई हमारा फेलो इंस्टाग्रामर उसको आंसर कर देगा. Okay, hopefully. So that's that. Coming to the first definition, rule number 3 is all about definition and all about setting your tempo right as and when you move ahead further with rules. And remember, sir, I'm not able to understand every rule, but my captain, faculties and seniors and others are saying that we should be thorough in each and every word of the rules without single word missing. No. That's what you have interpreted. That's not what they have said. These are two different things. What you interpret and what the others have, what the other person has said. So I don't think so. They have told you that you have to remember. Like, but the thing is, if you start to learn rules, you will realize there is very little flexibility to miss out on anything, because every word, like I say, is crucial. It has a meaning. It has a reason to be there. So, like I said, when you remember a song, you remember it as it is, tone by tone, word by word, beat by beat, because everything has a meaning behind it. You don't end up learning a song halfway through. You still remember, जब आप गाना गुनगुनाते हैं तो आपको beat, tempo याद रहता है. Likewise rules का है, इतना टेंशन मतलब, just go about reading it. एक बार try करो अच्छे से, and I'm sure आपका perception is going to change about. And trust me, it's not that difficult. Rules इतने difficult नहीं है, but you have to focus and you have to read them in peace. You cannot run through them. So let's start. Rule 3. Definitions, but these definitions are very crucial. Reason being, you are going to have your entire understanding of engaging into different situations based on these rules. So if you are going to bypass rule number 3, or you are going to not read rule number 3 properly, you are going to suffer, and you are going to suffer a lot, especially as the rules, as you proceed further in COLREGS, you are going to find them more and more difficult. So one of the most common definitions which we find difficult to understand is fishing vessel. So ideally, the term is vessel engaged in fishing. Okay, now if you run through the definitions, if you say, like, for example, if you read the first definition, A, the word vessel means every description. Now it to describe vessel, it says the word vessel means. However, when we come to fishing, vessel engaged in fishing, it says the term vessel engaged in fishing. Now you realize, so each and every word you have to monitor very carefully, and you have to keep comparing them back and forth. So when we talk about vessel, it says the word vessel means, because it's a single word, so it uses the word world. But whereas in vessel engaged in fishing is not a word, it's a term. So if you read them in detail, and if you read them with a peace of mind, you will see each and every word has like a meaning to it. So nothing here is misplaced, nothing here is placed just as it is. Thanks a lot, Alpha. So coming to the fishing vessel, the term vessel engaged in fishing means, what does it mean when we say fishing vessel? What is so special about fishing vessel? Means any vessel fishing with nets. Nets, आपने देखे जैसे fishing nets होते हैं, वो चाकू और खाने के बने हुए. So, but the thing is, what is so special about that net? We'll come to it. So any vessel fishing with nets, lines, trawls, or other fishing apparatus which restricts maneuverability. So basically, your fishing gear is, in a way, it's so constructed, or it's so being used that it is restricting your ability. That's why there is a separate category for fishing vessels. How does it bothers me? Well, it bothers me because that if I know that this vessel is not as maneuverable as it is supposed to be, it changes the whole engagement with that vessel. That means that vessel may have priority over my vessel. That vessel may have a right of way over my vessel, or in case of an engagement with that kind of a vessel, I might share more responsibility. Example, rule 18, power-driven vessel is supposed to keep out of a way of fishing vessel, except where rule 9, 10 and 13, else otherwise states. Disclaimer is always there in rules of the road. Okay, so remember that. So अब trolls line से क्या होते हैं हमने we need to understand this rule. We also need to know and also need to have a very clear understanding that when we say what is a net, what is a line, we need to have a picture in our mind. Human beings love to have an understanding, but based on some memory, based on some picture, based on some sort of a visualization, you know. So that's that. So I'll show you how a troll looks like, so that you, next time when I say a troll or a net, you have a very clear understanding of what we are talking about. You are not trying to mug it up. Okay, to make it more, visualize yourself in bodies. Okay. ओके नीचे हमारे काफ़ी दोस्त हैं जो लोगों के क्वेरीज को आंसर कर रहे हैं, तो प्लीज पे अटेंशन देयर एज वेल अगर आंसर मैं नहीं कर रहा हूँ. सो आई विल शो यू हाउ अ ट्रॉल लुक्स लाइक, एंड इट्स नॉट ट्रोल, इट्स ट्रॉल. सो ओफो मुझे अपना कैमरा निकालना पड़ेगा. सो आई टर्न द कैमरा अराउंड. दिस इज हाउ अ ट्रॉल लुक्स लाइक. सो यू सी, if a fishing vessel is using something this huge, this big, look at the size of the vessel. Now of course I'm not saying it's to the scale, but all I'm trying to tell you is, you see, these are all examples of trolls. So this is what trolls means. When we say a vessel engaged in fishing is a vessel whose maneuverability is restricted because of the gear it is using. So imagine, if you are using this kind of a, this is called troll. Okay, this is called troll. So imagine if you're tied to something this huge, this big, you are always going to find it difficult to have sudden alteration of courses. Okay, so this is what troll means. Okay, and I would try and see. Okay, this is wing in ground, I'll come back to it later. Okay, so this is what troll means. Understood? So when we say troll, now you understand what does, how it implies. So that's why if you're carrying something, if you're attached to something so big, so huge, you're always going to find it difficult. It's like if I load 50 kilo weight on your back and I ask you to run, are you going to be so maneuver? Will you be able to maneuver that easily? No. Even very easy example. If in case you have played any of the strategy games, one-on-one engagements, Call of Duty, or say like PUBG, I'm not sure about if this is an attribute of PUBG or not, but as you start to load up the player, like if you give him a better gear which gives you more protection, if you give him a heavy armor to protect, you will realize that the maneuverability of the player starts to slow down. Why? Because the gear is so heavy, so he's not going to be as quick. But if you remove the armor, the player becomes much faster. Likewise, that's the case with fishing vessel. You give such a huge troll tied behind it, it's not going to be that easy to change the course, slow down the vessel, so on and so forth. So that's why a vessel engaged in fishing is a vessel which is using these kind of apparatus, equipments which can restrict the maneuverability. But what is not included in fishing vessel? Well, in case you are using a gear, any gear which does not restrict visibility, maneuverability. For example, if you are just using lines, अगर मैं एक फिशिंग वेसल एक टैकल लेके पीछे बैठ जाऊं, जैसे आपने देखा होगा लोग बैठे रहते हैं फिशिंग के टाइम पे एक फिशिंग लाइन लेकर, will I be a fishing vessel? No, because that line is not restricting my ability to maneuver. Small line, I can turn around here and there. Or any other gear, even if it is big, if it is not restricting my ability, to alter my course or go left and right, well, I will not be a fishing vessel in that case, but I can be qualified as trawler. A trawler is different than fishing vessel. How? I'll come back to it later. So that's fishing vessel for you. So that's the significance of the gear. And remember, it's not necessary that a gear means something which can extend only 10 meters, 20 meters. A fishing net can go about extending 200 meters, 300 meters, 400 meters. So whenever you see a fishing vessel, and especially trying to cross ahead of you, you should always try and avoid passing the stern of the vessel unless you're not sure that the net is not present there. Otherwise, the net can end up getting fouled. So what can you do? Well, early action, if you're trying to alter and pass stern, reason being so that you give her an extra berth, an additional margin of 1.5, 2 miles, where you're sure that the fishing net is not extended that far off. Or perhaps in case of fishing vessel, there is no requirement that you cannot pass ahead, but as a good practice of seamanship, you should avoid. So engaging a fishing vessel is not a part of you can describe it as the situation as crossing, but rule 15 is not applicable. Reason being, rule 15 is applicable to two power driven vessels which are engaged in crossing situation. So the first requirement is both the vessel needs to be power driven vessel in case you want to superimpose crossing situation as per rule number 15. जिनको ये बात नहीं समझ में आ रही है वो जाके मेरा लाइव देख सकते हैं, मैंने बहुत डिटेल में रूल 15 एक्सप्लेन करा हुआ है. मूविंग फॉरवर्ड, अगेन क्लासिक एग्जांपल, लोग बहुत कंफ्यूज रहते हैं. व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन सी प्लेन एंड व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन WIG, विंग इन ग्राउंड? वेल, इसका सबसे सिंपल एग्जांपल है टेल स्पिन. आप सबने टेल स्पिन देखा होगा बचपन में. यू ऑल मस्ट हैव सीन टेल स्पिन. दैट बियर, द नॉट बियर, दैट बेयर who who's capable of flying that aircraft. It lands in water and it takes off from water. So that is a seaplane. So remember, whenever you are confused, just remember Baloo from Tailspin. So the Baloo in Tailspin had an aircraft which was a seaplane. It can take off and land at sea, but when it is maneuvering, when it is going to cruise, it's not in water. It is going to take off. So that's a seaplane, to keep it very, very simple. How will it typically looks? Well, I'll try and show you with a picture, but let me finish the explanation part first. Now then, what is a wing in ground? Because their description sounds similar, Well, a wing in ground, what does the definition says? Let's read the definition first. Wing in ground, WIG craft, means a multimodal craft which in its main operational mode flies in close proximity to the surface utilizing surface effect action. अब यार ये बहुत भारी भरकम डेफिनेशन हो गई. अगर हमने इसको रट लिया पर समझा नहीं तो it will never make any sense. And like I said, human beings love to have a visualization, a perspective of what they are trying to mug up, and then it becomes easy. Well, to explain wing in ground in the simplest term, आपको खिलाड़ियों का खिलाड़ी देखनी पड़ेगी. Though it's not a very in terms of finesse in cinema, it may not rate on very high standards, but अपने अक्की भाई ने उसमें कमाल करा था that he is lying on the sand and you will see the whole that big craft runs over him and yet Aki bhai comes out alive. How is that possible? Well, the reason is that craft is flying in a way that means it flies as a cushion. It's not in the surface of the water. It's not touching the surface of the water, but it is just in very close proximity to the surface of water. And that is what surface effect action means. And that's why it is also sometimes says non-displacement craft. Why it is non-displacement? Because अगर आपका पानी पे वजन ही नहीं है, if you are not displacing any water, so basically you are weightless. So that's what wing in ground craft is. It flies in very close proximity to the surface of water. It can be confused as a seaplane, but it's not going to take off like a seaplane. It will continue to maneuver in close proximity of water. But how does it looks like? मैंने आपको example दिया अभी कि a seaplane is more like from tailspin. A bear, who can fly the aircraft. The aircraft can land and take off, but eventually it's going to fly in air. It's not going to stay on the surface of water, other than the part of landing and takeoff. Whereas in a wing in ground is going to just continue on the surface of water. It's not going to fly or take off. It's going to continue in close proximity of the water. How does it looks like? Well, I'll try and show you around in a minute. Allow me a second. Oops, सारा सेटअप हिल गया. मैग्नेट बहुत अच्छी है. So ये जो आप देखने जा रहे हैं अभी, this is what wing in ground is. It flies in the closer proximity. You see, this is the cushion effects which is generated by the propulsion system, and it flies in close proximity to the water surface. So that's what wing in ground craft is. It may look like a seaplane, but it will not take off. You see, again, in very close proximity to the water surface. And ये आपको काफी दिखेंगे, in European ports where, they do small coastal voyages. So this is what wing in ground is. It's not going to take off, but it is going to stay in very close proximity to the water surface. Well, what is the benefit of it? Why will you not have it like submerged in water? Well, the drag. The drag is much less in case, oops, bear with me. Yeah, so the drag is much less. If in case it is submerged in water, the drag increases, the speed reduces. So, and the fuel consumption also increases. So, by not being submerged in the water, it propels much faster and consumes much less fuel. If vis-a-vis compared to if she is going to be submerged in water and then trying to make the same speed. This is one reason that ships are not that fast. Reason being they're trying to cut their way through a medium which is much more dense as compared to air. Okay, so that's why flying in close proximity, not taking off, so it doesn't require that kind of an engine where it has to take off, but it flies in close proximity to water and makes very good speed. So that's that. So that was wing and ground versus seaplanes. But remember, their DNA is pretty much like it says, it's a multimodal craft and they have to be treated as a power driven vessel, and they are pretty much giveaway for everybody. Means if you see them, well, they are supposed to keep out of the way primarily. If not, then rules of the road are quoted in a way that eventually the responsibility will come over you as well. But primarily they are supposed to keep clear. So that was wing and ground versus seaplanes. Now coming to three most famous and the most notorious vessels. The first one is vessel constrained by draft. This is a very interesting one and you need to pay attention to it. In case it gets boring for you, I'll try and crack a joke in between, but there is no way to make it any more interesting than what it is unless I don't have a big giant screen behind me where I can show you some visuals. I'm working upon it to get something like that as well in the future course of lives. थोड़ा रोकना चाहिए इसके लिए. Well, the term, again, it does not say the word vessel constrained by her draft means. It says the term vessel constrained by her draft means a power driven vessel. Now the crucial word is a power driven vessel. Whereas when we spoke about fishing vessel, what did it say? The term vessel engaged in fishing means any vessel fishing with nets. So any vessel fishing with nets or any equipment which can restrict the maneuverability. Whereas in constrained by draft means a power driven vessel. So what we need to remember is that a constrained by draft, end of the day, by its DNA, is a power driven vessel. Okay, so you have to be a power driven vessel to end up showing constrained by draft. You cannot be a ram vessel also showing constrained by draft, day or night signal, because as a ram you are given your own privilege anyways. You have your own privileges, whereas in you have a right of way of over many other vessels. But remember, a constrained by draft means a power driven vessel. So a constrained by draft is a power driven vessel first. Okay, it's a power driven vessel which because of a draft in relationship to the available depth and width of navigable water. Why width as well? Why not just depth alone? If I do not have enough UKC, which should give me the privilege. Well, if you have less UKC, but you have got 400 meters left and right of you, or maybe 1 mile left and right of you, so that means 2 miles. Well, that makes an awful amount of sea room for you to divert from the course and take an action. So that's why categorically the mention of word depth as well as width. Okay, so you need for you to deviate from the course, you need to have sufficient depth all around you, left and right. If you don't have the depth, you cannot maneuver. You will end up running aground. You don't want that. And you need to have room, width. If you have the depth, but that depth is only limited within, say, like a periphery of 50 meters, that means you cannot leave the zone. So it again restricts you from moving left and right. So that's why for you to qualify as a constrained by draft, you are restricted because of your draft in terms of available UKC as well as means in terms limited depth and limited amount of sea room. So it's width and depth of available water through which the vessel is going to navigate, and it is because of that you are severely restricted in your ability to deviate from the course you are following. So remember, it says you are severely restricted in your ability to deviate from the course. It does not say you are restricted in your ability to reduce speed. That's why they have categorically mentioned the word course. Okay, so it's important for you to understand that for a constrained by draft vessel, you need to be a power driven vessel and you are restricted in your ability to deviate from the course because you may not have enough width of navigable water, or you may be restricted because of there can be a river which can be 1 mile broad, but quite possible that the UKC is only limited in the middle of the river so you are restricted. Or you may have the UKC, but maybe only limited to, say like for a 500-meter zone. So either way, you can then only maneuver within that zone. So remember, your ability to deviate from the course gets restricted because of the lack of UKC, depth, or width of the channel. But remember, you will still have the capability to reduce speed. How much? Well, that depends on how strong the currents are, weather, wind, etc. But you need to be still in a state of, you cannot reduce so much that you end up losing your maneuverability. But you will always have the option of reducing speed. And that is why if you read in the later part of the rules, it is categorically mentioned in rule number 18 that as a constraint by draft, you have a right of way over many other vessels, but you must pay attention to the fact that you are restricted in sea room, you are restricted by width and available UKC, but you must pay very careful attention to that. That means that though you may not have the flexibility of going left and right, but you must in that case have your engines ready so that you have something to fall back upon. So you cannot say, oh, I was a CBD, so I had a right of way, so I continued maneuvering at 14 knots. You cannot do that. You still need to be maneuvering at safe speed, and you need to have your engines ready so that alteration of course may not be possible or may be limited, but you have full responsibility to reduce speed, because that's something which is not covered by the rule. So you're only restricted by in your ability to deviate from the course, not in your ability to reduce the speed, and especially until the effect where you are still maintaining headway and you are able to control your maneuvering. उस तक तो excuse ही नहीं है. So let's not get into detail, वरना बहुत courtroom argument में convert हो जाएगा. But simple word ये है कि you must remember that a CBD by its DNA is a power driven vessel. Now coming to the other two, ये लोगों को इनकी तोता फाइट करवाने में लोगों को सबसे ज्यादा मजा आता है. ये है restricted ability to maneuver versus not under command. लोगों को इनको एक दूसरे के सामने रखने में बहुत ज्यादा मजा आता है. We'll come to it. The term vessel not under command means a vessel which through some exceptional circumstances is unable to maneuver as required by these rules and is therefore unable to keep out of the way of the another vessel. That means a vessel, and now again it does not say the term power driven vessel restricted in her ability to maneuver means a power driven vessel. Now again he is using the word vessel. So the term vessel not under command means which through some exceptional circumstances, means there is something exceptional which is not routine, she is unable to maneuver as required by these rules and therefore unable to keep out of the way of another vessel. That means she is through some exceptional circumstance, we must remember, and she is not going to maneuver as required by these rules, which through some exceptional circumstance is unable to maneuver as required by these rules. So you cannot say, sir, if I am involved in a crossing situation with NUC, she is not going to maneuver as required by these rules. It's clearly stated within the meaning of the rules. So each word is very, very critical when you're reading the rules. So NUC is going to she's not going to comply with these rules. How much can she comply? Well, that depends on kind of circumstances she's going through. Okay. So there is no set parameter that how much she's going to deviate from these rules. But one thing is certain, that she may not be able to comply with these rules. How much she's not going to comply? Well, that all depends on what kind of exceptional circumstances the vessel is going through. So debatable. So we need to know certain background that why vessel is NUC, whether she has lost her propulsion or whether her rudder is stuck. Every situation is going to be dealt very differently in case of an NUC. And in fact, you as NUC are going to be dealing with your condition depending on what kind of exceptional circumstances are you going through. Because remember, good seamanship practice and common sense and prudent diligence will be still applicable over you as a duty officer as well as a master. Okay. So in case your rudder is struck and you are still going full ahead, well, the question is going to be, then why did you not reduce the speed? Why did you not slow down? So on and so forth. Why did you not try to anchor the vessel? So remember, just because you switch, and a criminal thing which we do on board is that in case we are drifting, we say, okay, because we need to wait, we are drifting. Oh, my engines I'm not using my engines, so let's switch on the NUC lights. It's absolutely wrong. It's contravening COLREGS. If you are drifting, you are still, as a power driven vessel, in case you are drifting, you are still underway. You may not be making way, and there is no reason for you to quantify or try to qualify yourself as an NUC. You are not NUC. Maybe your captain has told you, okay, let's drift and not use the engine, but that doesn't mean the engines are not available. Your engines are fit and fine. Your rudder is working absolutely fine. Your crew on board, they are more than capable of keeping a good lookout, including you as a duty officer. So never ever touch NUC lights in case you're drifting, perhaps waiting for the port or instructions from charterers. It's a wrong, it's contravention. If somebody reports you, you are in trouble. I've seen few people having this practice. Okay, drift कर रहे हैं, चलो NUC light on कर देते हैं. It's wrong. You're not an NUC. You are not running through any exceptional circumstances. Now, let's compare NUC and see how it's going to differ in definition itself when compared to a RAM, restricted ability to maneuver. Okay. I'm not going to get into the kind of vessels which qualify as RAM, but I'm just going to read out the definition. The term vessel restricted in her ability to maneuver. नाम से ही क्लियर हो जाना चाहिए, restricted in her ability to maneuver. तो restrictions तो हैं, but what? Means a vessel which from the nature of her work, means आप कुछ ऐसा काम कर रहे हैं which puts a restriction on you in terms of how you can maneuver your vessel, in her ability to maneuver as required by these rules. So you are restricted, the vessel is restricted in her ability to maneuver as required by these rules and is therefore unable to keep out of the other vessel. So differ कैसे हुआ ये NUC से? अगर आप definition में देखेंगे तो NUC की definition में लिखा हुआ है, it's stated in definition of NUC, some exceptional circumstances and is unable to maneuver as required by these rules. Okay, so the word is, in case of NUC, is unable to maneuver as required by these rules. Whereas in case of restricted ability to maneuver, it says, which because of the nature of work is restricted in her ability. So you see the difference? The word in case of NUC is unable. Whereas in case of RAM, the word is restricted in her ability to maneuver as required by these rules. Now, how does it changes the whole vibe of the rule? Well, NUC can pretty much say that I am unable to maneuver as required by these rules. मतलब मैं इन rules के हिसाब से maneuver ही नहीं कर सकता. Whereas in a RAM vessel is restricted, means you can still present compliance. You can still present certain amount of compliance. You are restricted in your ability to maneuver as required by these rules. It does not say that you are unable to maneuver as required by these rules. And many times, often, because we always mug up the rule without understanding the meaning, we end up using the word unable even for vessel restricted in her ability to maneuver, which is wrong. Because as a RAM vessel, you are restricted in your ability to maneuver as required by these rules, but you are not in a condition where you can say I'm unable to maneuver as required by these rules. That means your I would say it cuts more slack to you as an NUC. You can present more non-compliance with the rules because it is said you are unable to maneuver. When the word restricted means कम करा हुआ है, जैसे आप बोलते हैं आजकल मैंने खाना कम करा हुआ है, vis-a-vis मैंने खाना छोड़ा हुआ है. There is a difference between the two. There is one sentence, मैंने आजकल खाना बंद करा हुआ है. That means you are not eating at all. Whereas when you say I have restricted my diet, which means you are eating less. Restricted and a number. So remember, the biggest difference within the definition is the word unable, which is used in case of a NUC, and the word restricted as required by these rules in case of a RAM vessel. And henceforth, I would say that in a case where you have NUC versus RAM, though both are exempted to a degree from these rules, and the word unable gives more room to an NUC to not comply with these rules, but there is no reason that you will willfully not comply with these rules. Remember that. As a NUC, that doesn't mean it gives you that you will do willful negligence of the rule. That if you had your rudder, you could have altered. That doesn't mean, oh, I had my NUC, I will not maneuver. You, as a master, will still use your diligence and you will do everything which you can do in your capacity as required by due diligence, as required by good seamanship practice, to still help in the situation or best assist in that situation to resolve it. The idea is, end of the day, you must not collide. And if you are a RAM, if you have a team of 10 divers down, well, you are restricted in maneuver, in your ability to maneuver, or maybe you may be completely rendered in a position where you are not able to maneuver at all. And if you have an NUC coming your way that way, though you are a ram, but if you have 10 people down working perhaps on your ship side, or on other ship side with a vessel which is next to you, or there's a transfer of person, can you maneuver, can you alter your course? You cannot. Maybe you have to abandon that operation, and then provided you have that much amount of time. So remember, just because you are an NUC, and just because you see a ram, well, technically within the meaning of these rules, you might have a certain amount of leverage, but that is going to be a courtroom drama. But in an answer, I would say, just going by the theory, well, you will have a little more leverage over RAM. It is not given in rule 18, but if you dissect it as a lawyer is going to be, you can see the word is unable and restricted. But again, in a real life situation, it will all come down to what kind of an exceptional circumstances you had on NUC and what kind of a work RAM was engaged in that she decided not to deviate at all. Well, she still have her engines, so she could have reduced speed. So there will be always some silver lining to it, and the responsibility in case they end up colliding is always going to be a split depending who deviated more from the rules, and especially willfully. So that's that. Okay, there is a question: sailing vessel and power driven vessel. Well, a power driven vessel is any vessel which is being propelled by machinery. यानी अगर आपने एक इंजन उठाया, एक छोटी सी बोट में लगा दिया, पावर ड्रिवन वेसल बन गया, बड़े जहाज में लगा दिया, पावर ड्रिवन। मशीनरी से जब भी आप प्रोपेल हो रहे होंगे मशीन से, तो आप पावर ड्रिवन वेसल क्वालिफाई करोगे, प्रोवाइडेड यू आर नॉट एट द सेम टाइम आल्सो क्वालिफाइंग एज अदर कैटेगरी. रैम इज अ सेपरेट कैटेगरी, trawler is a separate category. But just if it's a vessel, if you fit a machine propelling machine behind it, it qualifies as power driven vessel in very simple way. A sailing vessel, just like the name suggests, it is not using a machinery to get propelled. It is using a sail to get propelled. So it catches wind, but why then the sailing vessel is categorized separately? Because both have certain means of propelling themselves. So why categorize sailing vessels separately? Why it cannot be a part of power driven vessel? Reason being, when you are limited in your maneuverability with the direction of wind, it can put certain restrictions of how much maneuvering you can have and how much speed you can make and how much you can deviate, because your sail which is catching the wind is going to decide eventually how maneuverable you are, how fast you can go, and how quickly you can alter the course. Whereas in a case of a power driven vessel, because you have the machinery, well, a machinery can be played around with, so you are in an ideal world, you're going to be much more maneuverable as compared to a sailing vessel. Now what if I have a sailing vessel with a sail, but also she's fitted with an engine? Well, if I'm using the engine, I'm no longer a sailing vessel. It does not matter if I'm using the sail at the same time. The moment I start to use my engines, it does not matter whether I keep the sail up or I roll it up, does not matter. I immediately turn into a power driven vessel. And that's why within the meaning of these rules, that in case you are a vessel, in that case you might appear to be like a sailing vessel, but because you're also using a small engine, you must have seen, especially in today's age, you see a lot of sailing vessels with a huge sail but also with a small engine, which they will either pick up or they will keep it in the water, so on and so forth. But in case you have started using your engine, irrespective of the fact whether your sail is still rigged or not, you immediately qualify as a power driven vessel, and you are supposed to at that time put a cone with apex upwards so that others are not confused and they don't take you as a sailing vessel. Because if I'm on a power driven vessel, I pick up my set of binoculars and I see a vessel which is approaching to me with a tall sail. I may not know that if at all you're using your engines. So, and in case you're using your engines and you're not displaying that top cone mark, well, you are trying to cheat the rules, because you in that case will have the power driven vessel feel more responsible as per rule 18 and keep out of the way of you. Whereas in the situation was totally different. In real life, you were using the engines and you were supposed to engage with the power driven vessel within the meaning of two power driven vessels engaged in a risk of collision. So that's how the meaning changes in case you are a sailing vessel using propelling machinery to propel. Now it does not matter whether you are using the sail at that time. Just because you have the sail rigged or you have folded the sail, it does not make any difference in case the propelling machinery is being used. But just the presence of propelling machinery does not take away the status of sailing vessel, provided you are not using it. So अगर आपकी sailing boat में engine लगा हुआ है but आप use नहीं कर रहे, वो idle है, वो बंद है, and your primary means of propulsion is wind, well, then you happen to be a sailing vessel and you'll have all the luxuries and the drawbacks as per rule 9 and 10 which a sailing vessel suffers with. So it will be a mixed bag of do's and don'ts. So that's that. So I think ROR का लाइव खत्म कर सकते हैं, and then we can have 10, 15, 20 minutes of one-on-one Q&A session. In case you have got any other doubts pertaining to rule of the road, feel free to shoot your question. Is VHF included in available means of determining risk of collision? Well, I would say yes. In my understanding, yes. There is a MSN notice as well, merchant shipping notices by UKMCA, which does not warrant the use of VHF, but it gives you an understanding of how VHF can result in making things confusing, but at the same time, how can VHF be used? Because the rule says all available means by sight and hearing. Now, VHF is a way of if you are listening to VHF and you can see that there is an NUC approaching you and she is making a declaration on the VHF, are you not going to utilize the VHF? How can you not? If a traffic separation scheme, if a VTS is giving you an announcement that right ahead of you a vessel has ran aground, are you not going to use the VHF? Or in case a VTS is calling you and they're telling you that, okay, you cannot proceed, there is a big collision 1 mile ahead of you, please alter the course, are you not going to answer that call? VHF, nowhere it is written that VHF is not a part which can be utilized in prevention of collision, but at the same time, kahin ye bhi nahi likha hai that you can utilize it. And remember, VHF is an equipment. It is not responsible for collision. How is it possible that this mouse can be responsible for a collision? It is not mouse to mouse, but if you are going to use it incorrectly. So if you are going to speak on the VHF, if you are going to communicate on VHF, wrong communication is responsible. Okay, अगर आप हावड़ा बोल रहे हो सामने वाले को सुनाई दे रहा है तो उसमें the problem is communication, the way you have communicated. You're not using standard marine phrases, you're using your own home cooked recipe of resolving a situation. Let's go green to green. So problem, how is possible that VHF has resulted? VHF तो एक equipment है. It's improper communication over VHF which results in a situation more complicated than it is supposed to be. So remember, if rule does not warrants the use of VHF, it does not restricts the use of VHF as well. And I've given you an example, especially in coastal waters, pilots are always using VHF, and the same example is also quoted in the MSN notice. If you go online, just search UK MSN notice on use of VHF and you will have a very detailed explanation of how VHF is evil, but how VHF has also aided in the industry. And we can talk about all the collisions which have resulted because of VHF, but we will never talk about the collisions which it has prevented because none are documented. Nobody talks about if something has never happened in our industry. We have got no data. Thousands of collisions are prevented every day when pilots are communicating with each other, and there are times where communication is more important than other, especially in Panama Canal, where you're approaching in a narrow channel where two power driven vessels are going to cross within very close proximity. You have to reduce speed, so on and so forth. So we are never going to talk about the number of collisions it has prevented. It prevents thousands of collisions daily. So even if it has resulted in hundreds, the overall number, that's why it is still required on the bridge. Though the primary function of VHF is distress, but at the same time, one of the function of VHF is also establishing communication. And what are you going to communicate? You're not going to ask, how are you, sir? How are you? As captain, since life kidhar hai? 10 baje main shifta hu, main to dekhunga nahi. Obviously, you are supposed to talk meaningful, things pertaining important, and there are categories. Urgency is a category where you transmit information which is important with regards to navigation. So if there is a vessel which is going to pass, she is a constrained by draft, and she makes an announcement that I'm a constrained by draft vessel passing this area at so and so time. Are you going to disregard it because we are not supposed to use VHF? So if anybody says do not use VHF, it's absolutely wrong. Avoid can be used, and the reason is because more often than not, people are not able to use the VHF judicially and they are not able to communicate properly. So VHF is not the evil, improper communication is. तो अगर मैं आपसे अभी मान लीजिए आप हिंदी बोलते हो और मैं आपसे मलयाली में बात करने लगूं तो आपको समझ में नहीं आएगा. So उस केस में we will not be able to communicate. So improper communication. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question. Long time brother. OIC, बहुत टाइम बाद मिले हैं. Welcome on board my dear friend Tripti. Gibraltar is a classic example. Yes. Ahoy the sailor, long time. Yes. Great to see you guys. How are you? हावड़ा बोला. Exactly. कुमार समझ गया मेरा idea. So that is okay. Restricted visibility radar in operational, fog, sound increasing. what will be your action? Restricted visibility, radar in operation, fog, sound increasing. It depends. Rule बोलता है fog का अगर है और sound सुनाई दे रहा है तो depend करता है sound कहाँ से सुनाई दे रहा है. If it is forward of the beam, I have to be very careful. So you need to give me one more cue that वो आवाज कहाँ से आ रही है. Okay, sir, when are you going to explain rule 2? Next live. Rule 2 is very small. कल या अगले हफ्ते rule 2 ले सकता हूँ because pretty much काफी rules तो cover हो ही गए हैं. Sir, can you explain difference between vessel underway and making way? हे भगवान, कितनी बार ये क्वेश्चन आएगा? नहीं भाई, इसका आंसर मैं नहीं करूंगा because ये क्वेश्चन मैं brother of S_07, I have answered this in all my lives. I request you to please go back to my lives and see what is the difference between underway, making way and aground. Okay. एग्राउंड तो मतलब आप नहीं होना चाहोगे. एग्राउंड मतलब चढ़ गया जहाज. एग्राउंड में कोई डाउट नहीं है. अंडरवे मतलब एग्राउंड नहीं है, शोर पे मेड फास्ट नहीं, मतलब रस्सी वस्सियों से नहीं बांधा हुआ है, टाई अप नहीं हो और एंकर पे नहीं हो. अगर इसके अलावा कुछ भी कर रहे हो तो अंडरवे हो, मतलब अगर ड्रिफ्ट भी कर रहे हो तो अंडरवे हो. ठीक है ना. और अगर इफ यू आर कटिंग योर वे थ्रू द वाटर देन यू आर अंडरवे एंड मेकिंग वे. बट डिटेल एक्सप्लेनेशन के लिए आपको जाके लाइव देखना पड़ेगा. अब अगर स्क्रॉल करेंगे तो मैंने हर लाइव में प्रैक्टिकली अंडरवे मेकिंग वे का डिफरेंस बताया हुआ, बिकॉज दिस इज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट frequently repeated question or one of the most asked repeated questions. Good evening Captain Tarun, how are you? तो विकी द सेलर, मेरी आपसे रिक्वेस्ट है कि आप प्लीज जाके वहां इस क्वेश्चन का डिटेल रिवर्ट देखें. ओके, और बच्चों ने क्या क्वेश्चन पूछे हुए हैं. ओके, कैप, हाउ डू यू सजेस्ट कॉलरेक्स फॉर फर्स्ट टाइम थर्ड मेट? ओके, आई विल आंसर दैट. What are the universities I can join? That is going to be in the next slide. Is chief mate exam hard? Yes, chief mate exam is one of the most difficult ones because you practically cover everything which is required by the duty officers, and you also cover practically everything what is required for your rank, and plus you are also supposed to know quite a bit about master's rank. So chief mate, I think yes, is the most difficult exams. And coming to the second question, what was the question? COLREGS first time. I think I just answered you. As a first time third mate, you should be knowing your rules of the road because that's how you have qualified you have cleared your COC certificate of competency. I don't think so there is any competency exams across the globe in the length and width of the globe. Width तो होती नहीं है. In the diameter, I can say, in the entire periphery of the globe where you can get away with an exam, your oral exam, without having good understanding of ROR. So आपके पास जिंदगी में 2 टाइम है ROR सुधारने के. कैडेटशिप में अच्छे से पढ़ लो और बहुत अच्छे से पढ़ो जब सेकंड मेट का एग्जाम. अगर दोनों बार आपने सिर्फ भर लिया है तो हमेशा तकलीफ होगी. एंड ट्रस्ट मी, पीपल से दैट देयर इज नो प्रैक्टिकल एप्लीकेशन ऑफ द रूल. आई से देन दे डोंट अंडरस्टैंड देयर रूल्स वेल. बहुत अच्छा प्रैक्टिकल एप्लीकेशन होता है हर सिचुएशन में प्रीटी मच, एक्सेप्ट फिशिंग वेसल इज वन वेसल विच आई थिंक वायलेट्स द रूल like crazy, and especially in South China Sea. But rules of the road is to save your own ass. So you do not worry if the other is not complying. You comply so that you are safe. Okay. It's like वो सामने वाला हेलमेट नहीं पहनता तो मैं पहन के क्या करूंगा? अरे भाई तू अपने सर की चिंता कर, उसकी मत चिंता कर. उसको समझा दे, अगर नहीं समझता है तो उसकी मर्जी. That's how it is. गीता बोल रहे हैं आप उनसे भी बात करो जो आपसे नॉर्मली हाई हेलो करना चाह रहे हैं. यस, हाई गीता, हाउ आर यू? व्हाट इज योर रैंक एंड व्हाट इज योर सैलरी? सॉरी, आई कांट आंसर दैट. प्लीज टेल मी अबाउट ओशन ईगल कंपनी इन इंग्लिश सर. वेल ब्रो, मैंने वो ओशन ईगल के बारे में नहीं सुना है अनफॉर्चुनेटली. आई एम रियली सॉरी. मैंने बहुत कंपनियों के धक्के गाए बट ओशन ईगल. सो ओके, आई विल रैप अप द लाइव टुडे. आई प्लीज जॉइन मी इन द नेक्स्ट लाइव व्हिच इज गोइंग टू बी मोर जेनरिक. इट इज गोइंग टू बी मोर light, but I have to end up. He's advising us. So let's catch up on the next live. I'll cut it short, otherwise ये live बहुत लंबा हो जाएगा. And I'll see you on the next. Thanks a lot for joining. Role of bamboo on board. Very critical role. It depends how you use the bamboo. Chalo, bye. Good night. Thanks a lot, guys. And I'll see you in the next live, which I'm going to start right after I end up this live. So that was rule number 3, definitions for you. See you on the next.